Hello everyone, this is Free Name on YouTube here. Today is going to be this Aquila Pro AI AX3000 Wi-Fi 6 Smart Mesh Router M30, so a D-Link M30 Gigabit Ethernet Router with Wi-Fi 6 built into it. We're going to have a look at it and then at the web admin interface, and that's probably where we're going to end it. But it's an interesting design, this router. Reminds me of years and years ago in the UK with BT OpenReach, or at least BT Broadband, the retail division. They had what people called the Stingray or the Squashed Frog DSL modem, USB DSL modem, which this router's design reminds me very much of. This router has on its underside a label, and the important things on this are probably the voltage usage and power usage, so 12 volts 1 amp. It has the wireless name and also a unique wireless password. It also does have a unique admin password as well for each device. So it's a D-Link M30, part number M30 EEU, and then lots of dots, and then A1. Has an air vent, or you've got vents on the underside for letting air in, and then a vent at the top for letting air out. You've got these two little wings, which presumably inside will have aerials mounted slightly higher than than if it were just stuck on the circuit board, which would be stuck very low down. On the back of the device you have on the far left side an LED on and off button, the gigabit WAN port, so the yellow Ethernet ports, and then 4 gigabit LAN ports. You have a WPS button, then a recessed reset button, the power jack, which is what looks like an annoyingly awkwardly small 12 volt power jack. So normally you'd have one that's that size, but there's no way that is going to plug into that hole there. So if your power supply goes wrong or gets damaged, it's going to be more difficult than it otherwise should be to get another power supply for it, or one that you might just have sitting around as a spare. So there's the power supply with its very, very small barrel jack, and as a comparison, this is from a standard router. This would fit most things, and then we've got the one for the D-Link. The power supply itself is model number AMS15090-1010000FB, 12 volts and 1 amp output. In the box you get a very brief manual, not even 2 pages. If you need to read this or want to read this, just pause the video. As with everything these days, they try and force you towards administering it using an app. So actually there may be another video, or at least another part of this video, where it also shows the app for that, if I've got the energy and enthusiasm to mess about with a mobile app. Comes with a Ethernet cable and a warranty booklet, which is probably half a paragraph of the language that you are, and then every other language in the world. So let's plug this in, turn it on, and see what it does. I shall plug it in. There's no LEDs on the back, no LEDs or indicator lights next to any of the Ethernet sockets, and it looks like there is just one LED. What's really weird is that looks kind of green on this video, but that is dark red. I see if I cover the light, it kind of sorts it out on the video a bit more, but that's a very vibrant red colour. after you first plug it in. We will see how long it takes to boot up. I do have a laptop over here which I can tell when it's finished booting. I'm going to see if I can hide the light where the indicator LED is, so you can see the colour more better. You can see the colour better than otherwise if the light is on it. It's still booting up, and I had one ping response just then, and then it stopped responding to pings again. It does take quite a long time to boot up, this router does. And it's now responding to pings properly, and the light has gone into a flashing orange mode. So just pulsing orange there. The next interesting thing will be to see what happens when we plug in a WAN cable or a network cable going off to the internet. Does it go to a different colour? So I haven't logged into it or done any initial setup. It's in factory default, and I've now plugged into the internet socket or the yellow WAN socket. So it is still just pulsing its orange light, and the laptop does have access to the internet, so even though the internet is working, the status light hasn't changed from what it was doing. The default it has just dropped offline. It does make me worried that it's... No, that's weird. It dropped offline for probably about 15 seconds there and has come back without me doing anything. I was slightly worried it was doing an automatic firmware update, but anyway, I'm not sure what it was doing. The default IP address of the router is 192.168.200.1, and I guess the next step is to move over to the web admin interface of this router, so I'll see you in the next segment of this video. So I've gone to the default IP address of the router, so 192.168.200.1. It asks for the admin password, which is on the sticker on the underside of the router, and it's titled device password. In my instance, it's 225726, so I've filled that in, and click on login. It should then ask you to agree to some terms and conditions, probably because it sends some of your data off to dlink and does automatic updates and other things. So there's nothing you can do other than agree to that. Then it talks you through the setup mode. So I want this in router mode, but you can have it as an extender for an existing dlink router in mesh mode. It's now going off and testing or detecting the internet connection type, and then asks what I'd like to set the Wi-Fi name and password to. By default, it's the details which are on the sticker on the underside of the router, and forces you to change the administration password of the router. So if anyone has this router in deployment being used, and it's in anything other than totally factory setup where it's blinking its orange light at you, the admin password will not be what is on the sticker on the underside, because somebody will have been forced to change it. Set your time zone, probably for things like internet filtering or turning off Wi-Fi at certain times. Normally, you probably would want this to automatically update, but in my instance, I need it older firmware version, so I'm going to leave it on managing the updates myself. Gives you a summary of what you're about to set, and then you can press submit. And it looks like it then will go off and reboot, and it has immediately rebooted. So the ping that I had going to the router on 192.168.200.1 is no longer responding, and we have to wait for it to restart. As mentioned before, this router seems to take quite some time to restart. So there we go, finally got there. So it's now responding on the default IP address. If we go back to the web browser, well, it seems to think that it's going to take yet another 50 seconds before it's ready, and in fact It responded to pings for a short period and has then stopped responding, and now it is back again. Hopefully this video so far has been helpful to you. If it has, it would be really helpful to me if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel. You don't need to have the video notifications turned on, but the subscriber numbers really do help, so thank you very much. I assume at this point you probably could manually reload the page. No, it has disappeared again from the network, so it really does take the full amount of time for this countdown for it to be ready. What's extra weird to me is I'm not sure why it would start responding on the network and then disappear and then come back and then disappear again. But, well, that's dlink's firmware for you. So new settings have been saved. Press OK. I'm going to assume, yep, it will ask you to log in with a new password. And log in. Interesting, even though I told it that I wanted to manage my firmware updates, it is forcing me to do an update. So there's no option on this screen other than to apply that update. I really don't want to do that update, so I am going to try and find a way around that. Alright, well that's got rid of that for the moment. On the first screen we get details at the top about the hardware version and device that it is and the firmware version that it's on. We have a strange button at the top, AI Assistant, with no messages available, so wonder what AI stuff it claims to do. Then we have some status stuff. So we've got a new firmware available, which I don't want to apply, and then we can pause internet access for all clients. And then get a little map. Each of these items here is clickable, so we'll go through that in just a moment. Scrolling further down, you've got status. So you've got internet status, and how long it's been connected for, release and renew the IP, or if you're on PPPoE, presumably disconnect and reconnect. It's got IPv4 status and IPv6 status as well, as separate little tabs at the top. A link to go to settings, so we'll try that in just a moment. But going back up to the top, we have the little map, and if I click on internet, it doesn't do anything at all. If I click on M30, I see what this does. It changes the section that's lower down the page, so if I do that, it changes further down here. So M30, which is the device itself, it shows you the LAN status, again IPv6 status, and the Wi-Fi details. Clicking on connected clients indeed shows you what's connected and the IP address that it has. You can press the big plus button to give an IP address a specific, give a device a specific IP address, and also whether it's affected by parental controls or not, and then extenders, which I have none of. I click on the little arrow to the right of extenders, it shows a mesh network map. Again, I've got no extenders, so there's nothing to see on that screen. So we can click on settings on the left, but I'm going to scroll down on internet and click on go to settings, which takes us to settings and then internet. If I go to wizard, presumably that's the screen we've already been through that screen. So settings, I need to get rid of that screen again, and internet, and we get the detailed internet settings. Interestingly, it supports VLANs for doing things like sending TV services over on a different VLAN and going out of a different port. So you could have it, for example, that your ISP has configured this so that the TV is on port 4 and they bring it in through a VLAN or a tagged packet on the WAN port. However, going back to internet, we have the option of static IP or dynamic IP, PPPoE, and then interestingly DS Lite, PPTP, and L2TP as well. You can also enable or disable secure DNS, which gives you the choice of using Cloudflare or Google, for using DOH, so DNS over HTTPS, and then if it fails, it can fall back to using just normal DNS if you enable that option. Under IPv6, you can change the type of connection, whether it gets its DNS servers automatically or manually, and whether it has prefix delivery enabled further downstream. If I click on Advanced Settings, it exposes further details and ways of assigning IP addresses to client devices. Quickly jumping back to the main internet connection, if we change this to PPPoE, we get, as you'd expect, the username and password, and also whether it's always connected or any other type, although I'm not sure why you'd ever select anything beyond always on. When you're in dynamic IP or static IP mode, you can then click on Advanced Settings and provide DNS servers, change the MTU, so the maximum transmission unit, and also clone the MAC address of another device. So if you needed to have the same MAC address as your ISP's router, if you're swapping out to use your own router, then you could fill it in that box there. Under wireless, you can enable or disable and change the Wi-Fi name and the password. Under advanced settings, you can change the security type. Beware, when setting WPA3 or WPA2/WPA3, if you find that your phones or your tablets or your computers just suddenly randomly disconnect, then it's quite likely to be the WPA3 setting. You can set it to use DFS channels, which are ones which I think are licensed for outdoor use, but if the router detects that there is a radar signal on the channel, it will shut down its radio. So generally using DFS channels isn't advised, because you may find, again, if it either incorrectly or correctly sees what it thinks is a radar signal, your wireless will just switch off and either may not switch back on or may come back after a period of time. You can have a wireless schedule, so times that the wireless is on and times that the wireless is switched off. AI Wi-Fi optimizer, which I assume means that regularly it scans what channels have what interference or other wireless networks on, and you can choose at which time it does that. Wi-Fi protected setup, which is the push button on the back of the router. If you didn't want people to be able to walk up to your router and press the button on the back to automatically connect without having to type in a password, you would disable this option. Moving on to network, which is where you'll set the LAN IP address and DHCP details of the router. So by default, 192.168.200.1 and the standard subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. I would never generally access it via access the router's admin interface using the hostname, but if you did want to give it a hostname, you could call it router, and then you'd log in using router.local. It's up to you, really. Enable the DNS server within the router. If you turn that off, then most of your devices probably wouldn't have internet access, although you would still be able to ping an IP address. But turning off the DNS relay just means that your devices won't be able to get to, or won't be able to resolve host names. Clicking on Advanced Settings, you get the DHCP server settings, which by default starts at .100 and goes up to .249 and has a lease time of 7 days. Wow. Okay, so that's a massive length of time to issue an IP address for. So by default, it does 7 days worth of leasing of an IP address to a device on your network before it drops in, will become available to another device. You generally shouldn't have to enable broadcast for DHCP responses. I don't think I've ever seen a need for that on any network or with any device. Then you can force your WAN port to specific speeds. So if the router or modem you've got from your ISP is not very good and is unreliable, let's say a gigabit, you can force your port down to 100 megabits. Or if in fact it's dropping down to 100 megabits but should be a gigabit, you can force the port to 100 megabits there. Enable or disable universal plug and play. So that is game consoles and torrent and peer-to-peer services and games probably on Steam use universal plug and play to start and stop port forwards, so you don't have to manually set them up. And IPv4 multicast and IPv6 multicast, probably just leave as default. That'll be for things like multicast broadcast TV, which nobody uses anyway. So D-Link Cloud would enable you to use the app to administer the router, so I may give that a go later. It looks like I don't have any ability to do anything here to set it up. Maybe because you have to do it through the app, or potentially because the firmware on this router is out of date and it's trying to force me to update. Operation mode, if you did want to change it instead of being a router to being an access point, or a so access point would probably be in bridge mode, and being a wireless extender. So if you had multiple ones of these, you could have it repeat an existing wireless signal. Under the features section, we have parental controls. Let's see whether this works. So if it's anything like TP-Link's parental controls, it's not going to be very good, but let's see. So I clicked on parental controls and then settings in the top right, and it gives you some messages. I don't really care about changing them. So go back to profiles and let's add a profile name, children's PC, allow internet access time. I want it to be allowed all the time, that's fine. Allow limited access, slow internet access for clients in this profile. Well, that's quite a good idea. So if you had a housemate or somebody who would use a lot of data, you could slow their internet down manually there. So website filter. So you can only block specific websites rather than categories. So this actually probably isn't that useful unless you wanted to stop your child getting or somebody to getting to a specific website. Let's try BBC website. Oh. Apply, and we'll also do the non-www. And I will apply it to the only device that's on this router, which is the laptop I'm on now. Save. Settings have been saved, so let's just check that I can get to a normal website. So let's do AOL.com, which I still can get to. Let's do bbc.co.uk, which indeed I get a block page for, so that does work. If I try HTTPS, what happens? Connection is not private, presumably because the router has usurped that connection, and indeed it has. And if I bypass that warning, I'll get the block page again. So that actually does work. It doesn't do categories, so you can't block somebody from accessing, say, adult content or gambling websites, but if you know a specific website you want to block, you can definitely do that. Let's try the speed filtering option. Let's enable the parental controls and slow down our flatmate's computer because he really screws up the internet and we don't want him to. So let's do that until 11:59 PM. No, can't do that. 55 PM. Yes. allow limited access, and add a device, that's their computer, and save. So I've done block internet access and selected allow limited access, and let's see whether it's done anything. Yes, indeed. So you can slow down internet access to usable for messaging and emails and a light bit of web browsing, but not good enough for streaming videos, downloading game updates and other things like that. So that's quite an interesting or useful function. It seems to limit it to around 1 megabit per second when you have block internet during bedtime and allow limited access switched on. So if I try and load a website, it should load, it's just going to be painfully slow. So there we go, slowly loading all of the images, but discourages internet usage, but is still got some kind of connectivity for, I guess, important things and important notifications. If we turn off the allow limited access, so essentially we're blocking it during bedtime, except in my example I'm blocking it for the entire day. Let's then see what happens when you try and access a website. So it doesn't even give you a blocked page, it just... No, it does give you a blocked page. And refuses to load that web page until you're not during the bedtime hours. QoS engine, quality of service engine. Let's see what speed it thinks it can achieve. I'm going to assume that it's not actually going to work, and it's a function that's broken, at least in this firmware version. But yes, let's assume that that's not going to work. Well, that's definitely not working. Let's reload the page. So I can't use the internet speed checkup, but if I turn on the AI traffic optimizer, I can put in, for example, my internet's 100 megabits per second down and then 20 megabits per second up, and we'll see what happens when I save that and we retry a speed test. And after enabling the QoS options, it indeed does limit the internet to 100 megabit down, and it's missing the mark a little bit on the upload. It says 25 megabit, and I've limited it to 20. But yeah, that function does indeed work. So I'll switch that off again. And if I retest the internet speed, I should see my standard gigabit connection. Going on to the firewall screen, we can enable DMZ, which, if you're ever asked to do it, you should really understand why. DMZ is basically port forwarding every single port through to a particular computer on your network. That would be useful if you've got, I don't know, a firewall within your network, but then at which point you may as well not use DMZ and in fact just have your firewall straight on the internet. Rather than going through a router in routing mode. Quite often games and advice on getting open NAT types tell you to do DMZ. You're far better off figuring out actually which ports you should be forwarding through to your device rather than just doing a DMZ. However, that's the option there. You can enable stateful packet inspection, I suspect, IPv4, enable anti-spoof checking. I'm surprised that IPv6 simple security isn't on, and ingress filtering. And if you click on advanced, you get application layer gateways, so you can turn off and on the PPTP, SIP, RTSP, and IPsec VPN helpers within the router. So especially for VoIP, so SIP, that can cause problems if it's turned on.
Going to IPv4 rules, this will be allowing, if the router was not in routing mode and you had like a static IP range, you can allow stuff through or block stuff there. IPv6 rules, because IPv6 doesn't do network address translation or routing. This is where you would set, although it seems to be off by default, which is really worrying. So that means that any device inside your network which has IPv6 is basically open to the internet. That really should be on, D-Link should be setting that to IPv6 filtering on by default with allow rules. And then if you wanted something to get through to one of your devices in your network, you'd then add an allow rule to allow that service through to the device within your network. So beware that. That's a really bad default and a really insecure default there. Port forwarding, so this is where if you have servers within your network and you want to allow stuff through to them, this is where you do that. So let's do my www server, local IP 192.168.200.5, TCP port 443, always enabled, apply, save, and that would be my HTTPS or my port 443 web server. If you accessed my internet IP address, it would go through to my internal server on that port. It looks like it can't do port translation, so if you had the server listening on 443 on your internal server, but you wanted it exposed on 8443 on the WAN side, it looks like this D-Link router cannot do that. Clicking on virtual server, we can add, okay, it looks like virtual server is port forwarding but with templates. So if I do HTTPS, it just fills in those details for me. Interestingly, under the virtual server section, it can do port translation, whereas under the port forwarding section, it doesn't have the ability to do port translation, which is a little bit strange. What a bizarre split of service or screens there. Don't know why they wouldn't just have. Why have they got the port forwarding screen and not just called the virtual server screen port forwarding? Because it's basically the same but with more flexibility. Anyway, static routes. Ignore those. If you know why you need a static route, then you're not going to be watching this video to find out about that screen. Dynamic DNS, so if you move around IP addresses on your internet provider and you want to be able to connect to your router or into your network, you can, with a know where your device is, if that makes sense. This will mean that a host name follows your IP address. It supports no IP and DynDNS. And it looks like you can have multiple ones, so you can have up to 10 different host names configured in here. Quick VPN allows you to create what looks like a VPN server using L2TP over IPsec. So you'd configure the server here, and it lets you export a profile for mobile devices. It's an interesting feature. Under management, you can set the time server to use and the time zone that you're in, and create schedules which will then be used for port forwarding and firewall rules. Weirdly, then these schedules aren't related to the ones which are used in the parental control section, but, well, disjointed firmware development or something. System log, you can enable it logging to a syslog server or email you details, and if you click on check system log, it will, well, gives you a download. It appears to not actually download. Okay, that's not compatible with Chrome, because Chrome blocks the download and then tries to resume it once you allow it, and I'm guessing the router doesn't support that function. So it'll probably work in another browser like Firefox or potentially Edge. Admin is where you change the admin password to log on to the web admin interface. You can also enable remote management and turn off the LED on the router. If I do that and click on save, it's immediately switched off. And then turn it back on and save, and it's immediately turned back on. Under System, we can save the settings, restore the settings, factory reset the router to defaults, and set, I really don't understand this, set a weekly or a daily automatic reboot. I really don't understand why that's a function. Under users on the left, we can create additional users which look like they are related to the VPN option under features, and upgrade is where you can do a firmware update. Ooh, I do not want that to happen. So because I need this to be on a specific old firmware version, there's no way I can show you that screen, because it looks like the moment you click on it, it starts to download the firmware, and that's absolutely not what I would like it to be doing. So I cannot show you the firmware upgrade screen. I apologise about that. So now I've got to wait for this thing to start up again, which, as I say, takes quite a while. And finally, the statistics screen. So that's after performing a speed test, and it's doing the upload portion of the speed test now. So there we go. I hope you found that useful. That is every single web admin page on this Aquila Pro AI M30 dlink router. Hopefully this video has been really interesting to you. If it has, it would be really helpful to me if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel. You don't need to have the video notifications switched on, but the subscriber numbers really do help, so thank you very much.